Afternoon, everyone. It is 12 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. And if any more jump on into the meantime, they will just catch up with us. Okay. So I apologize for if this is not sometimes correct. I made it while I was sick, so we're just doing our best, and I'm glad that we are all here for the final session of our small dairy herd management series. So this one is going to be all about calf care, and we're calling it Next Generation. So just ignore this slide. So if you're new, if you have not been on a webinar with us yet, welcome. This is our small dairy herd management series. So myself as team leader and then a number of my colleagues have all worked together to make this happen. We have a gal from Central Bank who was wonderful on all the lending expertise, as well as some of my colleagues with Extension, and then another colleague from NC State Extension. So it has definitely been a group effort for sure, and I think it turned out great. Okay, so the goals of the webinar is just give an introduction to the dairy industry as a whole. Mainly in Missouri is where I'm going to focus, but across the nation, it can all be implemented. And then another goal of ours is just explore the best ways to manage a small herd. We're going to break it down into step-by-step sections and just give it a more simple approach. And then finally, this is just an informative experience, whether you're a professional, whether you've been doing this your whole life, or you're brand new to it. So I just want something in here to be applicable to everyone. Okay. Then a little housekeeping before we jump in and get started. So throughout the webinar, I want you to interact with me. I want you to ask questions about anything that may come across your screen. So how do you do that is if you look at the bar on the bottom of your screen, there's going to be a chat box. So if you'd like to, you can type in any of your questions, comments, whatever it may be, and I will get to see it real time during our webinar. If you have any more in-depth questions or something that you think we need to spend a little bit more time on, feel free to send those to my email. So that is in the bottom left-hand corner if you need that. And then I will put it up at the end of the webinar as well. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is Chloe Collins. I am a dairy field specialist in Missouri, and I cover the Southwest region of Missouri. My main focus is any kind of educational programming, whether it be in person, online, like our Zoom webinars, and even some on-farm visits. Besides just the extension efforts, I do sit on a couple advisory boards from Soil and Water to our local fair board. And then my main interest is cattle reproduction. For my master's work, I studied the similarities and differences between bovine and canine reproduction and learned a little bit more about endocrinology. So if you have any repro focused questions, feel free to send those my way as well. Okay. So this is another slide that did not get changed. I apologize, but the first question is still very applicable to us today. So again, you can put it in the chat box, or if you feel just like talking, you're fine to do that too. Sometimes we have some smaller groups that we can have a little bit more discussion with. But what is your experience with dairy farming, and where are you looking to go with dairy? So that can be anywhere from you have 1 or 2 cows, or you have a whole entire herd. Okay. So today's topics, again, we are talking about the next generation, more specifically some calf care. So I've kind of broken it down into a couple topics I think would be good for us to start. And again, the purpose of this is to start from the bottom up. So some of these may not go super in depth, which is okay. It's just a starting point to ask questions, start thinking about things, then start making your plan. So today's topics, we're going to cover some genetic choices, colostrum and feeding, preventing disease, the environment for those calves, as well as housing and facilities. And we are just going to keep rolling today. I don't want to take up too much of your afternoon. I know you guys are super busy, especially during holiday season. Okay, so genetic choices. This is kind of a broad category that you can take in so many different ways of discussion. But I chose to kind of talk about what is the end goal when you're creating this calf? Are you wanting to do beef versus dairy? So even though we are raising dairy cows, we are milking, not every cow has to be bred back to a dairy bull, or you don't have to use dairy semen on them. So a new thing that is coming, or not really new, but it's being more popularized within the dairy industry, is branching into those beef on dairy crosses. And I think that's a really great thing if you want to kind of diversify your enterprise or just branch out and take a hold of those really good prices in the beef world right now. So you can definitely use beef semen on those dairy cows and get that little beef cross calf and then sell it as a stocker or just go ahead and sell it as a bottle calf. You can also use sex semen if you want to produce more calves of the sex of your choosing. So, for example, if your goal is to start raising heifers, you could definitely use some female sex semen and make your focus getting those heifer calves. But one rule of thumb that I do want to caution you on that sometimes just slips our mind is try not to breed that female to a male that is a bigger stature than her. That's where we start running into some of those dystocia issues, hard calving, and really putting that mama at risk. So we see this a lot in the dog industry with a bunch of like poodle crosses are all the rage, but a lot of people don't remember if that female is very small and you introduce a male with bigger growth genetics, she's going to have a hard time carrying and having those puppies. So same thing for us. Do not go and breed your little mini Highlander to a Holstein bull. Bad things are going to happen. But if you're doing, say, like Holstein to an Angus, Jersey to Angus, you're good to go. Okay. So that was just our little genetic choices piece, just something to consider, have in the back of your mind. Not a bad option to have. Right. So the big thing I definitely want to focus on is setting these calves up for success. So if you've gone through all the work to raise that heifer, raise that mama cow, breed her, get her ready, and now she has a calf, that is everything that you've worked for. So we're going to make sure that this thing is healthy, alive, and does well. So our first step in making that happen is colostrum. So colostrum is the very first milk that mother is going to produce after birth. And what it is it is basically like a serum milk that is super high in nutrients and antibodies. So why is that important? So when those calves come out, there is zero immune system going on. There is maybe some very passive immunity from the mother, but the colostrum is that first step in really ramping up that immune system creation. So colostrum in general is high in immunoglobulins, specifically immunoglobulin G. So if you've ever heard of IgGs, that's what we're talking about. So these IgGs really, again, just kickstart that passive immunity building. And then anything, when we're measuring the quality of colostrum, anything higher than 50 mg per mil of IgG is good. So how do you test that? If you've ever heard of a Brix refractometer, that's how you would test it. And then they do make some at-home colostrum tests. Okay. So the amount of those IgGs, or your immunoglobulins present, that can depend on that cow age, her diet, her health status, and even her breed. So a younger heifer is probably not going to transfer as many immunoglobulins as an older cow who's had time to build that immune system. But then if your cow is too old, so our elderly ladies, they're probably not going to be passing as many immunoglobulins as our kind of mid-age 3-4-year-olds. Okay, so now we know what colostrum is, why we give it, how much of this do we need to be giving. So rule of thumb is brand new calves, they need to have 5% of their body weight in colostrum within 4 hours of them being on the ground. So usually, just depending on your calf size, this roughly equals out to 2 quarts. And then there is kind of the age-old question of, should you separate that for first feeding? Should you just give those 2 quarts all at once? And what I've learned and what I've discussed with our state dairy vet is they just need to have those 2 quarts all at one time to make sure that it's there, it's going to work, and they are good to go. So once you've gotten those 2 quarts in them within those first 4 hours, then you can go ahead and follow that up with a second feeding, but don't let it go past 24 hours. So that's another 2 quarts. So all in all, make sure that they've had at least a gallon before that 24-hour mark. And then looking at the bottom of our screen here, 30 minutes is ideal for that very first feeding, since that's when the transportation ability of those immunoglobulins are the highest. And as the time goes on, that transportability or that transfer easy access goes down. Okay, so now we know how much we're feeding, when are we feeding, but where do we get our colostrum from? So again, colostrum is that very first milk from the mother. So that is the first place that we want to go to get our colostrum. So if that is available, we're going to go ahead and get that colostrum from the dam. And to guarantee that that calf gets enough of it, it's recommended to actually milk it from the cow and then feed it to the calf. If you let that calf just nurse naturally, it's not always a guarantee that they're going to get that full 2 quarts, and there's no way for you to really measure that. So just for our success, for the calf's success, go ahead and milk her and then give it to the calf. If that's not available for whatever reason, if something was a hard birth, we lost the mother, our next best option for getting colostrum to that calf is using frozen, or you can get fresh from a donor cow. So say one cow has twins, and then you have a cow that had lost a calf like that morning. Go ahead and use that cow that has lost the calf. Go ahead and milk her out, use that colostrum for your other calf. And then frozen is a good option as well. It's always nice to have that on hand for emergency situations. And we'll talk a bit about freezing colostrum in a second. So ideally, first from the cow, second, either frozen or from a donor cow. So if we do choose the donor cow method, make sure that it's good quality. So again, measuring those immunoglobulin concentrations, and then it came from a healthy cow. So that is super important. If you've ever heard of Johne's, that's a very contagious disease and usually causes people to have a closed herd. But if you were to get colostrum from a herd that has Johne's, your calf is now going to get that and then transfer it to your herd. So that's one of the ways that we don't think about, but is usually the biggest culprit of that Johne's transmission. Okay, is everybody doing okay so far? Kind of keeping up? Okay, so if we can't get colostrum from the mother, if we can't get it from frozen or from a donor cow, our next options are colostrum replacer, and then there's also colostrum supplements. So replacer out of the 2 is the one that you should go for first. So that replacer is basically like a replica, is what I like to call it, of our natural colostrum. It's going to have all the nutrients and all the antibodies that you're going to need. If you use colostrum supplement, that's kind of not up to par, if you will, but you can add it on to some of that donor colostrum. So a supplement is just kind of like a booster. It's not going to be the whole entire replacement. Okay. So a situation where you could definitely use supplement is, say, you're milking out that dam, she just doesn't have enough volume of colostrum to make that first 2 quarts. Go ahead and throw some of that supplement in there just for the volume purpose and to give some extra nutrients. Okay. So I'm a visual learner. I like pictures, so I thought we would throw some in here for y'all too. So what are we looking for in terms of colostrum? So besides usually the actual measurement to measure the quality, we're also going to look for color is an easy way to tell, is this colostrum or is this milk? So on the left, this is actual colostrum from a cow. And then on the right is just going to be whole milk. So you can definitely see the one on the left definitely has that more yellow tone. If we were to pour it, it maybe look a little bit thicker than milk does. But usually that yellow is what you need to know if it's colostrum or not. So So say we have a cow that is just a great overproducer. She does well every single time. She gives us a little bit more colostrum than we need. What should we do with it? And if our calf only needs around 1 gallon of colostrum total within that first 24 hours, and she gives us 2, what do we do with the rest? So my suggestion, if that colostrum is good quality, that cow's healthy, keep that on hand. Go ahead and freeze that colostrum and keep it in case of emergencies. If you were to have a calf that needs some in the future, you're going to have some on hand and ready to go. So the way that I like to freeze colostrum that has worked out well for me and in terms of storage and then easy thawing, I like to go ahead, separate it into my little 2-quart sections. So that way I just have to thaw what I need at the time. So I do it in those gallon freezer bags, and then I will go ahead, pull my 2 quarts in, and then freeze that bag flat. So fill your bag, then lay it down on a flat surface. I sometimes will just use like a cookie sheet and throw it in the freezer. So when you have them kind of in flat form, like notebooks, if you will, they're really easy to just kind of stack in a freezer. And then when you go to thaw them, it thaws a little bit quickly since it's not all jumped together, it's just in a flat sheet. So just remember when you are thawing your colostrum, please do not microwave it or put it into boiling water. That is the best and easiest way to kill the antibodies, which just ruins the whole purpose of us giving colostrum. Okay. Has anybody ever used any frozen colostrum from their own farm or just frozen colostrum in general? Oh, how long is it good for once it's frozen? So I compare this to pretty much any other animal product. I would say a year max is what you want to keep it in your freezer. And then once that year is up, probably go ahead and get rid of it just because those are antibodies. They once were like active microbial organisms. We'll just go ahead, throw it out, and then make sure because our colostrum is super important for our calves. So if we don't have good quality colostrum, it's probably not even worth giving. So I would say a year. Not to say that it's not viable after a year, but our best quality is going to be within that first year. Yeah, great questions, y'all. Okay, so to make it even simpler and even easier to remember, this is a genius term that I cannot claim my fame to. But remember your 3 Qs of colostrum. So quality, make sure it's at least 50 mg per mil of IgG concentration. Our quantity, remember we're giving 2 quarts within the first 4 hours and then a whole entire gallon total before that 24-hour mark is up. And then quickly, so ideally we feed that colostrum within 30 minutes of that calf being on the ground. So quality, quantity, quickly. You guys can do it. Okay, so once we've got our colostrum situation all good, all figured out, ready to go, what comes next in terms of feeding that calf? So what else do they need besides that colostrum? They definitely need water. So make sure that those calves have access to water every single day. You can do that in a bucket that just attaches to their hutch or wherever you are housing them. And then after that colostrum has been given, you can move those calves onto a milk replacer 2 to 3 times a day. So either bottle feeding them, learning buckets right off the bat, whatever is working for your operation. And then if you have excess milk, so if you have a couple cows that are milking, you're not using all that milk, you can use that to feed your calves, and it's recommended about 10% of their body weight per day. However, the only cautionary tale with using our excess milk with our younger calves, naturally it's going to have a higher microbial content. So just those microbes that cow is producing that travel through their milk, and then the exposure time, it's just going to be a little bit higher than our milk replacer. So just be careful with younger calves, again, since that immune system is not fully there and functioning. But once we get into our little bit older calves, probably around a month old, I'd say you're fair game on that one. Okay, and then once we have got them on milk replacer, our next step is getting them on grain and then eventually weaning them completely from the milk. So grain can start being offered within that first week of life. So the sooner that they're messing with it, eating it, the better that rumen development is going to be. So grain really helps to start developing those structures, that function of the rumen, instead of it just being a simple monogastric-like stomach is what I would call it. Then you can also start transitioning those bottle calves to a bucket. So if they're drinking water out of a bucket, most likely they'll go ahead and drink their milk as well. And then once those calves are eating about 1 to 1.5% of their body weight in that dry matter of their grain, that's usually a safe bet that we can go ahead and back off their milk replacer. Okay, so I saw this quote by Penn State. It was in one of their articles about weaning calves, and I loved it. So if you want to, feel free to take a screenshot, or this is also going to be recorded and posted for you guys too. But they said to ease weaning stress by ensuring calves eat at least half a pound of grain per day for 4 weeks, or a pound per day for 2 weeks, and then that they reach 2 pounds per day for 3 consecutive days before weaning. So backing off milk feeding gradually before that full weaning can be a helpful strategy for increasing grain intakes, but keep in mind that the time required for rumen development is about 21 days from the time the grain is first introduced to them. So if we assume that calves are eating some grain when you start the weaning process, you can step them down for a minimum of 12 to 14 days to prepare their rumen. So I know that's a lot. It's a little bit more technical and scientific than what I'm going to give you. But I love how they break it down into that step down program. Or you can say, hey, we're hitting this benchmark, we can kind of move on with our weaning process. But if you take nothing else away from this, just remember that 21 days from the time that grain is first introduced is what is absolutely required to start developing the rumen before you take away milk. So we're probably about halfway through. We've made it through colostrum, we made it through feeding. Now we're going to talk more about the disease, the environment, and then finally our housing situation for our calves. So I'll take a little break to just answer any questions, any thoughts. If not, we will go ahead and move on. Okay. So we're going to kind of touch on the topic of preventing disease. Again, this is not super in depth, so we're not going to go through all the causes, the treatments, the diseases that are out there, but we're going to skim the surface. Okay. So what is our goal with preventing disease? So in general, if we're preventing disease from affecting our calves, we are giving them that best opportunity and the most availability to gain, to grow, and improves their overall health, which improves overall survivability. So the faster they gain and grow, the faster they make it into a herd as a fully functioning heifer and or bull calf. So it is our goal to create the next best generation, whether that is us retaining them in our herd or sending them to another program. Okay, so remember, again, we've talked about it already, but those calves are born with zero immune system. They cannot protect themselves from anything, and the only way that they start building one is through that colostrum. And it's not an immediate, oh, I've given them colostrum, now they have their immune system and they're ready to go. It is a timely process that does take a little bit of building and strengthening, and then a little bit of exposure. So during that time that we're building those calves' immune systems, biosecurity and sanitation are going to be your best friends for preventing disease. And it is a little redundant at times, sometimes it may seem annoying, but the way I like to look at it is taking that extra step for safety is better than losing a calf. Okay, so before we even build a biosecurity plan or start talking about it, let's learn about the factors that are going to be working against us. So one of the main things with our newborn calves is just general stress. That's the first thing that they're going to experience, and the first thing that we're going to need to mitigate to raise a healthy calf. So what kind of stress or stressors are they encountering? One is just birth itself. They've been raised within this placental habitat that is comforting. They have everything they need. And then all of a sudden they're out here on this cold ground in this new world, and they're like, where in the world am I? So that is the first stress that they encounter. Next up is separating that calf from the mom. Another stress is housing changes. So again, going from being with our mother to not, and then in a hutch, then to group housing. All of that is different stress that we need to combat. And then some other things that, of course, are stressors that come later in life for them would be like ear tagging, dehorning, and then just general improper handling can cause a lot of stress to calves. Right. So now that we know what we're working against, how can we combat it? So first, biosecurity is one of the best plans to have in place for those new calves. How you're going to do that is control and monitor any kind of movement from livestock, equipment, and people that come in contact with your calves. So that includes you as well. Even if you never leave your farm, there's still precautions in place to make sure you're not spreading diseases. Another way that we can help mitigate this is cleaning our housing, and then the area that the housing is in can play a huge role as well. And then one of my favorite things to recommend that is pretty simple and can fit into your daily routine is just do your chores from youngest animals to your oldest animals. So go ahead and feed those calves before you go into the milk barn instead of doing it after. Okay, so again, it kind of just skims the surface. If you have questions about any particular calf diseases, feel free to email me and we can go over that as well. All right, so general environment for these calves. We want to do our best to kind of create their ideal environment. And I know as producers, we can't control environment outside of our farm or sometimes even on it with the weather, but we can control what enters our farm, whether it be on legs, on wheels, whatever it is, we can know what's coming in and out. So we can use that knowledge, create those practices for how, one, you're handling your calves, as well as if you have any folks working for you, maybe your family helps out, just making everyone aware of these things. Right. So let's start with us as producers. Sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, we can be those biggest transmitters of disease without even realizing it. So say we go and deal with a sick cow, and then we circle back to go check through our calves. So you're taking whatever you walked in around that sick cow, bringing it back to these calves with zero immune system and expecting nothing to happen. So sometimes just being conscientious of what we're doing, when we're doing it, where we're doing it can save them. So simple things that just add it to your list, even though I know sometimes they do get redundant, but it is important. So go ahead and wash your hands before and after handling those calves. Before, because you don't know what you're bringing to them, and then after, so you don't take anything from them to someone else. And then clean clothes and boots. Just wash your chore coat every now and then. Walk through some chlorhexidine solution with your boots. It doesn't have to be super crazy in depth. You don't have to create a whole entire new routine, but just take some common sense steps. And then my favorite thing to do is just have separate tools and supplies that are solely for your calves and then clean them after every use. Whether, say, you only have like 2 calves a year, keep their stuff in a little plastic tote and set it to the side and only use it for them. Okay, what else can we do? So again, chlorhexidine is one of my favorite things. I keep it at my house all the time because you never know what you're going to need it for. But use that as a solution to sanitize your boots, your supplies, your buckets, whatever it may be. Another thing that we can focus on for those calves is our vaccination protocols. I love vaccines when they're used correctly. I think they should definitely be part of your preventative health plan, but don't use it as a band-aid or a sole method to keep things healthy on your farm. And then another one with calves, I don't think there's anything as too much sanitation. So clean your bottles, clean your buckets after every feeding, and then store them in a bright, dry location. So if you've ever, for my Springfield people, if you've ever heard of Sargrove's like favorite thing that he says is sun is nature's disinfectant. If you are going to go clean those calf pads, leave them out in the sun for a day. It'll do wonders. Okay. So speaking of housing, we're going to jump right in. So the easiest thing that I like to recommend for calf housing is hutches. So if we look at this picture on the right, I'm thinking just your typical plastic hutch. These are fairly easy to get, to buy. You can sometimes find them used on like Facebook Marketplace, or just about any farm store can hook you up with one. And then just some grid panel for the little space out front of the hutch. Fairly easy to build, fairly easy to store, easy to clean, and you can usually just throw one in the back of a truck bed and go. So what these things on your have-to-have list for a calf hutch, sorry y'all, is maximum airflow in the summer, protection from weather, easy access to feed, and good drainage. So if we take a look at this picture, for airflow during the winter, we want something that has little closable flaps. We want it to be solid, so we're protecting from our snow, our easy access to feed. There's an opportunity to hang buckets on this front panel here. And then good drainage. It's not super apparent, but in this picture, if you can see, these hutches are kind of on a slope. So on the left, those are sitting up a little bit higher, and then it looks like they're kind of going down a hill. So that's important for drainage, whether it be water, whether it be urine, whatever needs to be drained away from the calf to keep it dry and warm. Okay, so that goes right into what should we look at, what should we consider when we're deciding where to put our calf hutches on our place. So we want to keep them far enough apart to where those calves cannot touch, so no nose-to-nose contact of any sort. So if we go back to this picture here, you can see that these are they're spaced pretty far away from each other. So there's no way that this calf here is going to be able to find a buddy and go touch noses with them. So our next one is that slight slope for drainage. And then we want to place these hutches where the sun can shine in them for the majority of the day in the winter. And then making sure our bedding is always clean and dry, and then clean and sanitize those hutches outside and away from any other animals. So to kind of expand on that last point, whenever we're cleaning these things, we don't want any of that runoff from those hutches to be able to reach any new calves that we may have, or anything where we have a lot of animal movement. So say you had something with scours, we don't want to spread any of that disease shed somewhere else. Okay, so now you got our hutch, we know where we're putting it. What do we need to put in the hutch? So whenever we're choosing our bedding, we want to think about how easy it is to store, how easy it is to clean and remove that bedding, and then calf comfort, sorry. So some of our options that we have for bedding, we can use straw, we can use shavings, sawdust is even an option, sand, and gravel. So a lot of ours, we see straw is pretty popular, but then it becomes a problem in the summertime because flies love to hang around straw. Another thing to consider is sand and gravel. It will actually start compacting on itself, and it does get pretty dirty easy. So in my opinion, I really like shavings. I think they're pretty easy to store in the bags. They're pretty easy to spread out, and they're also easy to remove. So why in the world should we focus on what type of bedding we're using? Is, again, back to those stress factors. We want to reduce stress on the calf, and one way of doing that is keeping them clean and dry. So our clean and dry bedding is always that first step in reducing just pathogen hangout area is what I call it, and then increasing their comfort. So again, clean and sanitize in between every single calf going in or out of that hutch. And if that calf becomes sick, go ahead and do a deep clean then as well too. All right. So this went by a little bit faster than I thought, but at least you guys have your afternoon back. If there's anything you want to recap, again, this will be recorded and posted. But to leave you with some summary points for the day, I want to just remind you the 3 Qs of colostrum. So remember quality, quantity, and quickly. Second point is sanitation and biosecurity are your best friends, even though sometimes it may want to pull your hair out, but just taking the extra care and time to do it will save you in the long run. And then along with that, our third point is it's easier to prevent disease than it is to treat disease. And it's a lot cheaper to prevent it than to treat it as well. Okay. So again, here is my contact information. There's my email and my office phone. If any of this conversation brought up points that you want to talk about more, questions you're unsure of, or even if you just want to call and talk about any part of small dairy in general, please do. I'm available we can even set appointment times if you just want to schedule an hour to deep dive into something, you let me know. So again, this will be in our email. So you